Thomas Tallis and William Byrd, two musicians living in an age of uncertainty 500 years ago in England, where only one religion was allowed, where worship was compulsory, and where every time a new monarch came to the throne, they changed the national faith. Two composers in an age of adversity for whom choral music was the profoundest expression of deeply held religious beliefs. Through the reigns of 6 monarchs and 100 years of social and religious upheaval, singing the Lord's song in a strange land. My journey will take me from the solemnity of cathedrals to the despair of the place of execution. From the private chapel of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I to the Holy Mass celebrated in secret deep in the English countryside. As I discover how 2 Roman Catholic musicians, Thomas Tallis and his younger colleague William Byrd, survived and flourished during the tempestuous foundation of the Protestant Church in England. There are few documents from Thomas Tallis's long life, no birth certificate, no accounts of his parents, or of where he learned to write and to sing. In a sense, the only biography is the music he composed. One of the first facts we can be sure of is that in his early 20s he was appointed organist at this small and rather undistinguished priory in Dover. He, like everyone else, was Roman Catholic, growing up and learning his music in the great medieval tradition of plain chant and polyphony. But in the 5 years he spent here beside the sea, his world changed, or rather, Henry VIII changed the world. Henry's act of supremacy declared the king to be the only supreme head in earth of the Church of England, and he backed this up with his Treasons Act, which made it high treason and therefore punishable by death to refuse to acknowledge this fact. Officially, England was no longer a Roman Catholic country. Thomas Tallis was a gifted musician at a time when virtually the only outlet for his talents was through the church. The huge upheavals in religion and society over the coming decades are central to the life of this man who, whatever his own private faith, worked diligently at the business of making sacred music. These are the original main gates of Waltham Abbey, and when Tallis passed through them in the autumn of 1538 to take up his post as organist, it must have been with mixed feelings. At the time, Waltham Abbey was a massive establishment. The church, the only substantial surviving building, was 4 times its current size. Harry Christophers is the artistic director of the 16, a choir of specialist early music singers. He chose Waltham Abbey as the space in which to record the music for this programme because of its powerful association with Tallis.
What amazes me about his music is the amount I, as a conductor, can interpret. I look at things like the Poenatus Mass, which on a page looks very confined, but actually it can take a vast amount of interpretation. For me, Tallis is first and foremost a great composer, one of the finest, and I have to constantly remind myself that Tallis worked for the church. Those were the jobs in music in the Tudor times.
However, for the previous couple of years, since Henry VIII's break with the Church of Rome, monasteries, priories and abbeys have been closing down left, right and centre. Monks were forced to declare that their way of life was a vain and superstitious round of dumb ceremonies. They were evicted, their lands were seized, chapels and cloisters left empty or demolished, and any resistance was punished by execution. By now, monasteries were closing at a rate of 20 a month, and the new organist must have been well aware that Waltham Abbey's days were numbered. In fact, it was less than 2 years before the abbey was finally dissolved, and Thomas Tallis was looking for another job. Although documents relating to Tallis are rare, there are some, and I've been told that the British Library in St Pancras held something rather special. Nicholas, you found a book for me to see, and I don't know anything about it really, but it's something to do with Tallis.
That's right.
So, show me.
Yes, well, it's written by a man called John Wilde. He's written his name at the front. So this book belongs to John Wilde, sometime precentor at the monastery of the Holy Cross in Waltham. So he's from Waltham Abbey. So this must have been part of the library of Waltham Abbey, and it's got lots of different music theory treatises in it, including at one point as a few pictures as well, showing the way that the breve can be divided into semi-breves and so on. And then at the end of it is Tallis's signature here. He's written Thomas Tallis. You could ignore that bit because it looks more like
it's that one there.
It's just that one at the top. Thomas Tallis.
It's such a beautiful signature, and it's quite spidery, but it's rather elegant.
And this is the only example we have of his handwriting. No letters survive, certainly no music.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to doubt that it is Tallis himself. Unfortunately, we've stamped over it, but you can still make it out. So, of course, Tallis was at Waltham Abbey until its dissolution in 1540, so I imagine he took this book away with him when the abbey was dissolved. Maybe they gave it to him because they had no further use for it.
And when you say they had no further use for it, do you think that what was in this book was somehow Catholic and therefore of no use, or just simply that they had
it's Catholic in the sense that all of it is about the performance of plain chant. That was Catholic and now abolished, so it was no use to anybody.
We don't know when Tallis the singer became Tallis the composer. The body of his work that has survived is relatively small and almost impossible to date, but all display his ear for subtle melody and his gift for close harmony.
Tallis's music has this amazingly ethereal quality, and in something like Onata Looks, it's an amazing gem. Within that, he's produced something that has an incredibly celestial quality. That's the way Tallis distributes the voices in a very sensitive way. He does set very much one note to a syllable, but there is always a part that has a little melisma, a little moving line that adds a nuance to it. That gives the music a very tender approach. For me, as a conductor, there's no doubt about Tallis's music that all the lines are very singable. They lie very well for each voice. You can't say that of every composer of the Tudor period.
Tallis was one of the first professional musicians, quite simply an employee who looked to the church to provide him with work, whatever the political or religious climate. His new job as a professional singer or lay clerk was here in Canterbury, at the heart of a religious revolution, lending his voice to the development of a new style of liturgy for the Church of England. Gone was the Latin language and the elaborate ornamental ritual associated with it, to be replaced by plain, simple music with the words in English. But he didn't stay here for long. He'd landed a job for life as a member of His Majesty's private chapel choir.
I think what's important to remember is that singing the music for the daily office and composing the music were not two different things, they were the same thing. You were employed to make music for the devotions of the Chapel Royal in the most literal way. You would go away and you would write it, you'd turn up, you'd hand it out, and then you would sing it. So a lot of the gentlemen are providing music on a kind of week-in, week-out basis for the chapel to sing.
Can you tell me when it was built?
The room itself dates from the end of the 15th century, but it was turned into a chapel in about 1530 by Henry VIII, when he appropriated this complex of buildings from a leper hospital and turned it into a royal palace, and that's when this room became the chapel.
This chapel.
That's right.
So, in fact, Thomas Tallis would have known this room.
Certainly he would have done, but there's still a certain amount here that Tallis would recognise, principally the ceiling, which was painted probably by Holbein, but certainly in honour of Henry's fourth marriage in 1540 to Anne of Cleves.
Not a successful marriage.
Well, no, I think the ceiling was probably the best thing that came out of that marriage. I think it's important to be clear that the Chapel Royal, in one sense, is not really a place at all. It's a body of people. It's part of the monarch's personal entourage, part of the household, and it's a body of clergy and musicians that attends the spiritual needs of the sovereign wherever the sovereign happens to be. The king would move around an awful lot, partly to go hunting and partly to impress and intimidate nobles in various parts of the country.
And in Tallis' time, trying to work out what his first title would be.
Gentleman of the Chapel Royal.
Oh, right. So he was...
It was all very much on order of seniority. You joined at the bottom of the list, and you move up the list as people die. That's the way it works.
Still a young man, somewhere in his mid-30s, but his talent has thrust him into the heart of the state, serving first Henry VIII and then his son Edward VI as the new religion found its feet. But the establishment of a Protestant church in England was about to come to a sudden stop as Henry's eldest daughter, Mary Tudor, took the throne. She re-established the Catholic faith and promptly started executing Protestants. Bloody Mary sent almost 300 martyrs to their death during her 5-year reign. Tallis, as a loyal member of Her Majesty's Chapel, was instrumental in his employer's policy of reimposing the Catholic liturgy. She also found a suitable husband to father a Catholic heir. Here at Winchester Cathedral, Mary married Philip of Spain, and Tallis, as a member of Her Majesty's choir, was at the ceremony. The marriage could hardly be described as a happy one, and Mary died childless. Under the terms of her father Henry VIII's will, her half-sister took the throne, and the new Queen, Elizabeth, was determined that Protestantism should return. Citizens now had either to convert back to the Church of England or hold on to the old faith in secret. Creative, adaptable, and immersed in the English choral tradition, Tallis seems to have managed to balance his private religious beliefs with the demands made by the new Anglican Church.
My guess is that Tallis was a Roman Catholic at heart all the way through his life. But, like any other professional musician, you're not going to get yourself sacked by speaking out and getting yourself into trouble by not toeing the line. Tallis is only a very practical composer. He does basically what's expected of him. He's a pure professional. Any professional would say, right, this is what I do. If the rules have changed, I'll change with them.
Elizabeth was very keen to promote a new form of singing to complement the liturgy. For the comforting of such that delight in music, she said, it may be permissible to sing a hymn or such-like song to the praise of Almighty God. This hymn tune, composed by Tallis for a collection made by the first Anglican Archbishop, Matthew Parker, may be familiar. Elizabeth had issued injunctions forbidding elaborate church music. She required a modest and distinct song which may be as plainly understood as if it were read without singing. This, of course, did not apply to her own church services.
Although, technically speaking, this was a place where Protestant worship was held, it was a private household chapel of the monarch, it wasn't a public space, and a lot of the people who were visiting it were foreigners and Roman Catholics. The chances are that what went on there was a bit of a compromise. The services could be held in Latin. They could, therefore, include quite a lot of Latin text and music. So I think it would be wrong to think of the Chapel Royal as being a place where staunch Anglicanism is being bashed down your throats. Quite the opposite, I think.
Elizabeth's private attitude was perhaps unexpectedly tolerant. There is one Jesus Christ, one faith, the rest is dispute about trifles. And then William Byrd, a gifted young singer, choir master, organist and composer, was recruited by Her Majesty's Chapel. Tallis at that time was approaching 70 and had already served the Chapel Royal for 30 years. But over the next decade, he and Byrd would work closely together to the greater glory of God and, of course, of Queen Elizabeth. Elizabeth claimed to have, in her own words, an affection for the science of music. And recognising that she happened to have the country's two greatest composers in her choir, she gave them a gift, a monopoly for printing music in England. The business wasn't exactly a success, but they published one book, Cantiones que ab argumento Sacre Vocantor, composed by Tomar Talisio et Guglielmo Byrdo. They couldn't flatter Elizabeth enough. The book is dedicated to the most high, mighty and magnificent empress, and they lavish praise upon her musical skills. Compared to the greatest masters, they said, you easily surpass them, whether by refinement of voice or agility of fingers. At this point, Queen Elizabeth had been on the throne for 17 years, so Tallis and Byrd decided not only to incorporate that number into the structure of their book, their 34 songs, 17 by each composer, but they also decided to let it echo within the songs themselves. Within the heart of Tallis's extremely complex piece, Miserere Nostri Domine, is a 17-note melody.
Miserere nostri Domine, miserere nostri.
Right, well, I didn't actually check whether there were 17. I'll trust Tallis on that.
It's 17 notes to either a syllable or a change of note.
Right.
Very clever.
And that can only work if it has some presumably emotional, or in this case, sort of spiritual impact, doesn't it?
Yes, I mean, this is the amazing thing about this. It's a technical feat of just amazing brilliance. But like all feats like this, in the hands of some composers, they can just be technical and academic and boring.
Mm.
But in the hands of Tallis, it's the most phenomenal piece. I mean, let's just hear the first few bars.
Tallis must have felt an affinity for his junior colleague. Perhaps he saw something of himself in this talented young professional musician. And like him, William Byrd seems to have come from humble origins. The first sure fact we have about William Byrd's life is that in the 5th year of Queen Elizabeth's reign, he came here to the Cathedral Church of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Lincoln to take up his post as organist and master of the choristers. Byrd spent 10 years in Lincoln. He lived here in Minster Yard in a house that's no longer standing. And he married a local woman, Juliana Burley, at St Margaret's in the Close Church, which was somewhere around here, although it's been long since demolished. This is Byrd's first workplace, the choir stalls, which have barely changed over the last 400 years. I think we can imagine him here, a young man, gifted, perhaps ambitious, producing the new streamlined music for the Anglican Church, but all the while surrounded by this very elegant but heavily ornamented stone and woodwork, a nagging reminder of the old faith. Lincoln Cathedral has an archive of documents that goes back nearly 1,000 years.
Here we have the official record of William Byrd's appointment as organist and master of the choristers here at Lincoln Cathedral. It's like a minute book. It's a record of the meetings of the dean and chapter. This is all in a typical Elizabethan secretary hand. It's mostly in Latin, which of course was the great language of legal records. And here we have the official record of William Byrd's appointment.
Point him out for me, just for the thrill of it.
To all faithful Christian people, know that we have granted the office of Master of the Choristers to our beloved in Christ, Dilecto Nobis in Christo, William Byrd, for the term of life.
One of the few church organ pieces of Byrd's to have been preserved is this, an improvisation on the starting note the choir master gives to the choir. And another entry in the account book uncovers an interesting story.
September 1570, and basically the chapter insisting that in services, rather than playing the organ, who's just to give the starting note for the choir, and then to sing with the choir and not to play the organ. Now this suggests to me that Byrd had been experimenting on the organ, and that the dean and chapter didn't like this. It was not simple enough. It wasn't the basic Puritan simplicity that was what they wanted.
But it was in a ledger book from 1567 that we found something that made me profoundly grateful for Elizabethan bureaucracy.
There we are. This particular section here deals with miscellaneous payments made to various cathedral staff and employees. Over here we have this amazing signature, William Byrd, Master of the Choristers.
Oh, wow.
Acknowledging 9 shillings for livery, which would be for whatever he was actually required to wear during cathedral services.
This is extraordinary. It's a very, very, very elaborate signature.
I think we get some impression from that of the way Byrd saw himself. He wasn't shy and retiring. He knew he was a great musician, and I think that says it.
And how thrilling to see it.
Yes.
It's a beauty there.
Seeing Byrd's signature gave me a powerful sense of direct connection with him. But can modern techniques of handwriting analysis provide a further insight into his psychological makeup?
This signature of William Byrd's appears on the account books of Lincoln Cathedral, where he worked as a young man in his 20s as pulsator of the organs, I love that phrase, and as master of the choristers. And you see it looks stiff, it looks formal, it's decorated with these figure-of-8 patterns which are about the image that he's trying to create. Your signature is about your public image, and you sense from this that William Byrd is trying to project an image of maybe being quite grand, maybe he's trying to grow into this job that he's been given as a young man. But as he finishes these figure-of-8 patterns, he dispenses with the last loop very swiftly, and I sense in this a certain impatience with this formality, that although he'll go along with it, really that's not what is essential to him, and he's really interested in deeper, more spiritual concerns.
15 miles west of central London and squeezed in between Heathrow Airport and the M4 motorway lies the Middlesex village of Harlington. After leaving Lincoln, this is where Byrd and his family settled, apparently taking possession of Harlington Manor. The manor is long gone, and there's no real trace of Byrd or the village that he knew here now. As ever, it's a few surviving documents that give us a clue, and at this point there are two of particular significance. Firstly, there's a petition to Her Majesty written jointly by Tallis and Byrd, and curiously it concerns neither music nor religion, but property. Pleading poverty, they ask Her Majesty to grant them a bundle of leases for nearly a dozen properties scattered across southern England. These were lands seized after the dissolution of the monasteries, and their leases entitled Tallis and Byrd to various rents and tithes. So, our two composers were landlords. The other document from the same year is perhaps more telling. On a list compiled by the recently enthroned Bishop of London of those who were guilty of not attending church in his diocese is the entry, wife of William Byrd, one of the gents of Her Majesty's Chapel, the first explicit evidence of the family's Roman Catholicism. Being a Catholic at this time was a dangerous game. Recusancy, which means refusal, was punished by increasingly harsh fines. £20 for not attending a place of common prayer, and even more for singing, saying, or even just hearing Mass. Over the years, Byrd, his wife, and his servants were repeatedly named for refusing to worship at this church. The punishments not deterring them, who knows? Byrd, it seems, was a stubborn, strong-minded individual. Perhaps a sense of persecution even strengthened his faith. Then, at the age of 80, Tallis dies. That's all we know. But Byrd was moved to write an extraordinary elegy to his old friend. The imagery is pagan, we don't know who wrote the words. It could have been William Byrd himself, but the sentiments are heartfelt.
Ye sacred muses, race of Jove, whom music's lauded Come down from crystal lands above.
Tallis was buried in Greenwich. His grave has disappeared, but a few words from his epitaph have survived. As he did live, so also did he die, in mild and quiet sort, O happy man. To God full oft for mercy did he cry, wherefore he lives. Let death do what it can.
Tallis is dead. Tallis is dead. And music dies. And music dies. And music dies.
In the years that followed Tallis's death, Byrd began to publish regular collections of his vocal music, sacred and secular, as he termed it, some of gravity, others of mirth.
For pleasure, for pleasure, for pleasure of the joyful time, the joyful time, the joyful time.
Designed to be used in private music making, the books were carefully dedicated to prominent and influential members of the Elizabethan aristocracy. One such family were the Peters of Ingatestone Hall, faithful servants of the Crown, keen amateur musicians, and recusant Catholics.
Good morning.
Good morning, Lord Peter.
Do come in.
To meet you.
Do come in.
And this is the present Lord Peter is the 18th holder of the title. Byrd was a friend of both the First Lord and of his father, the Tudor politician William Peter.
Let's go through there, then round to your right.
Right. Oh, that's a Tudor portrait.
That's right. That's Sir William, who was John the First Lord's father, and he was the one who really founded the family fortunes.
A shrewd politician.
He was Secretary of State to all four Tudor monarchs, but still remained a Catholic, or at least the household here was Catholic. He just regarded his public life totally separate from his private life, really, in essence.
Sir William built this house on land surrendered by the church after the dissolution of the monasteries. His son and heir, John, was another astute politician, defiantly retaining his Catholicism, even whilst giving loyal service to Queen and country.
He went out of his way to move against Catholics in order to sort of, in a way, sabotage what was going on.
So you're not saying he actually prosecuted Catholics? Or
Well, they had a commission to discover Catholics, in which he was one of the sort of joint chairmen. And they weren't very good at it.
Very good. Very good. And these portraits here?
That's him in that portrait there.
Good looking chap. In the winter of 1585, a servant was sent by the Peter family to fetch Mr. Byrd down from London. He arrived with a few fellow musicians and spent the Christmas holiday season here in private celebration. There would have been a Catholic priest in attendance, which in effect made the whole event treasonable. The fact that it was illegal to celebrate Mass didn't deter Byrd from publishing a trio of full Latin Masses for 3, 4 and 5 voices, and these represent a new phase in Byrd's career, liturgical music written specifically for performance in secret. That was lovely, Harry, and the choir. It's lovely to hear just the four voices, isn't it? Especially here, because you get that sense of something illicit, actually.
Yes.
Presumably, Byrd was trying to do something different in the sense that it was a new situation for a composer, wasn't it?
Totally new. I mean, Byrd here, he's writing it in private. And so the 3, the 4, the 5-part masses are incredibly intimate, personal statements, really. Everything's very, very individual. It's starting with this beautifully simple line. So simple. And then suddenly he will allow this incredibly expressive line to come from the bass later on.
That's quite elaborate, isn't it?
It's incredibly elaborate. And then when he brings the final do note up, it's one of total intimacy, total plaintive nature.
With single voices, you're just literally passing one phrase and one line very delicately and very quietly from voice to voice. It was lovely to do it that way in Ingatstone Hall, and it was absolutely right for that setting. It's very, very still and very quiet in there. I think it definitely made sense.
Byrd sincerely believed in the redemptive power of singing. He wrote that since it is so good a thing, I wish all men would learn to sing. He believed it was easily taught and quickly learnt, and that the better the voice, the better it is to the honour and glory of God. Byrd's compact and intimate masses and motets, their concentration of emotional energy and superlative technical skill, is a practical demonstration of that philosophy in very troubled times. Many Catholics suffered gruesome deaths because of their beliefs. Byrd's response to the public execution of the Jesuit preacher Edmund Campion was this elegantly subversive song. This is part of a tunnel through which prisoners were taken to their death at Tyburn, present-day Marble Arch. After the publication of Declamationes, his 10 Reasons Against the Anglican Church, Edmund Campion was arrested and taken to the Tower. There he was tortured and questioned, a process in which Queen Elizabeth herself took part. But he would not renounce his faith. The only possible outcome was his execution, or, if you prefer it, his martyrdom. Intrigued by this sophisticated musical expression of despair and anger, I went to King's College London to consult David Trendle, an authority on the stylistic interpretation and performance practice of English church music. It's quite sober, quite melancholic.
Absolutely, yes. It's very much reflects the almost helpless note of the text. Why do I bother using my paper, ink and pen, and call my wits to counsel what to say? It very much reflects that, and this very melancholic, slow-moving idea. this that circular thing that just coming back over and over again. And then you have this falling figure, this is again melancholic figure, and to call my wits, and it's pre-echoed, if you like, in the instrumental part. So and a call to wits to counsel what to say.
That's lovely, that pre-echo.
Yeah,
it's lovely,
beautiful,
isn't it?
And then we have some rather nice, when it gets to the word an angel's trump, so trumpet, you get almost a sort of little fanfare type of figure in the top voice. That type of thing. An angel's trump. The really interesting thing is actually at the end, because it's very dissonant. We have this note suspended over in one of the middle voices, and it's, if I just play the last little bit,
I love that.
Yeah, which you don't find anywhere else, and very, very rarely in anybody else's music. But Byrd uses it very, very expressive.
Well, exactly. He uses it as an emotional tool, doesn't he?
Yes.
Yes, it shouldn't work, but it
No,
does.
it
It's
does.
absolutely beautiful.
The tower saith, the truth he did defend. The bar bears witness of his guiltless mind. Tyburn doth tell he made a patient end. On every gate his martyrdom we find. Clearly, whatever public acknowledgement of Protestant faith was required by his being a member of the Chapel Royal, concealed some deep and intensely private beliefs that he was determined to explore.
In 1593, the plague swept through London, claiming 10,000 lives in 6 months. Byrd and his wife left the city and came here to the village of Stondon Massey in Essex, close to the Peter family and close enough to London that Byrd could keep up his association with the Chapel Royal. And it was here that he was to spend the last 30 years of his life. He took out a very long lease on this property. Unfortunately, this is not the original building, which was demolished in the early 18th century to be replaced by a house that then burnt down in the 1880s. So in fact, this building is late Victorian.
Byrd quickly became entangled in a number of legal disputes with his neighbours, particularly with Mrs. Shelley, who claimed the freehold of his house and with whom he conducted a 20-year feud. She accuses him of vile and bitter words, and insists that he claimed that if he could not hold on to the property by right, he would hold on to it by might. Perhaps one of the reasons he fought so hard to retain the house was that it was ideal for a secretive Roman Catholic. We know that at this time there was a concealed footpath that led over the fields to nearby Kelvedon, a notorious centre for recusancy.
We know this because, inevitably, there was a legal dispute over it. Shaded by the woodland, it would have made a clandestine route for Byrd and his family to visit their Catholic friends there, safe from the eyes of prying Anglican neighbours.
This was an age of coded messages, of hidden, secret meanings. When the Italian composer Philip de Monte, who was working for the King of Spain, sent Byrd his arrangement of Psalm 136, By the Waters of Babylon, it might have been seen as merely one composer asking his revered English colleague to admire the exquisite 8-part writing. and exquisite it certainly is, Byrd felt compelled to reply with his own version of the psalm, although he started it with different words. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? And so here it seemed were two composers innocently sharing their delight in setting biblical texts. But De Monte was a Catholic, safe in a country that still owed allegiance to the Pope. Byrd had to hide his Catholicism in a country that had exiled itself from the Church in Rome. So their exchange had a deeper political significance, and Byrd was to add a touch of defiance to his setting of the psalm. He would not forget Rome. If I forget thee, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. When James I of England and the Six of Scotland succeeded Elizabeth, he ramped up the penalties against Catholics. His Act for the better discovering and repressing of popish recusants contained measures for the seizure of land and imposed restrictions on where Catholics might live and their freedom to travel more than 5 miles from home. Byrd's response to this was to continue his project for secret Catholic music. He compiled a collection of 109 compositions, which became known as the Gradualia, music for the whole cycle of the Church's year, including feast days and saints' days. Glorious music, but on an almost domestic scale. Themselves, as I have learned from experience, there is such hidden and mysterious power that to a person thinking over divine things, diligently and earnestly turning them over in his mind, the most appropriate measures come. I don't know how.
Byrd was very explicit about the fact that he liked to read the words and contemplate them before setting them to music. And you can just tell, listening to Justus Romanimi, that he's read that text and thought about it so carefully before getting going. And he's held himself back because he wants the words really to come through with maximum impact. Byrd is actually expressing his own personal views at a time when it was dangerous to do so, and writing for people who shared his view and who therefore wanted to use Roman Catholic words as a way of registering their protest and their belief. But then, when he gets to the end about they shall be in peace, the souls of the departed shall be in peace, he allows himself a much more luxuriant kind of music. And the reason why he's done that, I'm absolutely sure, is that he wants, through the music itself, not just the word setting, but the actual musical flow, to mimic the idea of peace, as in the text. It's like ripples going along. It's got a calming effect.
Time and time again, Byrd, his wife, his children and his servants were all summoned before the courts for failing to attend services here at Stondon Massey Parish Church. Over the years, the family must have paid out many hundreds of pounds in fines, a fortune at the time, but Byrd remained resolute in the old faith. Here's William Byrd's will, where he asked to be buried here near his wife. Which is sort of ironic, isn't it, considering he didn't come to the church that often, so most of his time trying to avoid coming to the church.
I find this quite a sad signature, really. A determined old man, 82. We see strokes in the lower part of the letters that are extremely thick and long, and to me these represent the strength of Byrd's feeling. But he's an old man, and you can see in the falling line of this signature, in comparison with the straight lines of the will itself, how he was being dragged down, and you feel that he's still determined, he's still persistent, but how much longer can he go on fighting?
Byrd died in the summer of 1623. The cause of death is not recorded. In accordance with his wishes, he was buried here in Stondon churchyard. There's no sign of William, or indeed any of the Byrd family. The oldest headstones seem to be about 17th century, but then time and lichen have eroded so many of the inscriptions. And perhaps William had no headstone at all. At this time, Catholic burial in consecrated ground was only just tolerated. Most Catholic funerals took place at dusk, an excuse for candles, perhaps, but this was still forbidden ritual. Byrd's attitude to his chosen texts was uncompromising. Holy words in which are sung the praises of God deserve nothing less than a heavenly harmony to the extent we can attain it. Time and time again he stresses that his mission is to adorn divine things with the highest art of which he is capable. In the final episode of Sacred Music, I go beyond Tallis and Byrd as my journey takes me to Germany to discover two geniuses of the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther and Johann Sebastian Bach.
There's a brand new series of Sacred Music starting here on BBC4 on Friday. There's more info on that coming right up. And Series 1 continues here next.